I don't need such an expensive child, Dylan Cruy said, looking at his son, who was trying his best to remain resilient despite the severity of his illness. This thin, slightly trembling voice broke into the atmosphere like thunder into a cloudless sky, breaking the awkward silence that reigned in the room. Dylan was leaning against the wall, his expression cold and indifferent, as if he was trying to lock up any emotions in order not to let them escape. Rachel, his wife, was standing next to him and, hearing these words, could not help laughing. Her laughter sounded as if from afar, an echo of something that had once been alive and joyful, but now turned into emptiness. She looked at her husband with a smirk, and then at the boy, who, despite his suffering, tried to look strong. At that moment, the whole room seemed to shrink to the size of their little tragedy, and nothing else mattered. I decided that I couldn't stay in this circle of indifference any longer. If you two think that I, as his grandmother, will adopt him, you are deeply mistaken, I said without hesitation. Rachel winked at me and casually said, he doesn't have much time left anyway. Just don't come back to us asking for money when it's time for his funeral, okay? After these heartless words, she laughed again, not realizing that it was a laugh not only at Stephen's fate, but also at those around him. I felt anger boiling in my chest. From this moment on, we are strangers, never contact me again, goodbye. I blurted out, taking one last look at my son, who could not and did not want to see how deeply I was offended by their behavior. The doctor told me something important about my grandson Stephen's condition, and despite all the suffering, I decided to cut ties with Dylan and Rachel without telling them about it. I knew that when they found out the truth, they would deeply regret their actions. When I gently hugged my grandson, feeling his weak but full of life body, I was sure that they would eventually realize what it means to be real parents. My name is Camilla, I am 63 years old. I am a housewife, and my husband passed away 7 years ago. It was lonely at first, but I got used to this silence. With my husband's inheritance, my pension fund and pension could live comfortably and peacefully. But behind all this prosperity lurked a sense of guilt. My son Dylan, who is now 33 years old, has not settled down. Despite the ideal age for marriage, he continued to lead a carefree life without even thinking about his responsibilities. After graduating from college, he got a job, but worked for only 3 months before he quit due to conflicts with his boss. I remembered how my late husband often lectured him about life, about how important it is to find your place in this world. After his death, Dylan rarely visited me, and it broke my heart. I didn't keep in touch with him, although I tried to help him morally and financially until he graduated. Now it seemed to me that I had done enough. One day, however, out of nowhere, Dylan returned home without any warning, and all our hidden resentments resurfaced. It's been 2 years since I last saw Dylan, and he looked completely different. His face became tired and exhausted, and his clothing style changed strikingly. He was wearing a bright aloha shirt, which contrasted sharply with our modest rural landscapes. His whole appearance seemed to scream that he had forgotten where he came from. "Hey, I got married," he said, with the obvious intention of shocking me. I was left in a state of complete disbelief, and when Dylan saw my surprised face, he clicked his tongue and shouted to someone in his car, "Hey, it's okay, come here." A woman responded to this call, and I involuntarily noticed her appearance. She got out of the car, dressed in an outfit that looked out of place for our small town, and, to my surprise, a small child was hobbling behind her. What's happening? It flashed through my mind. Is it a boy or a girl? His long hair made it difficult to identify. But on closer inspection, I saw the features that were so familiar to me, and realized that it was a miniature Dylan, the one I remembered when he was little. "From today on, we will stay here," he said, not paying any attention to me. "I'm Rachel, nice to meet you," the woman said, walking past me as if she had always been a part of this life, and without turning around, entered the house. The little child tried his best to follow her, but she didn't deign to look at him or say a word, as if he didn't exist. I couldn't drive them away, so I let them stay. As soon as they dropped their stuff, it looked like they were going to get out, but I quickly stopped them. Explain to me what's going on. Dylan told me how, shortly after my last meeting with him, he met Rachel and how quickly their relationship began. She turned out to be pregnant, and by the time they realized it, it was too late for an abortion. They decided to have a child, not knowing that all this romance would turn into big expenses, and as a result they found themselves without funds, returning here to their native lands. But, judging by their appearance, they still had money for pleasure. How can you be so irresponsible? I cried. As if this was normal, Dylan waved it off. Cola, it's irresponsible. If you want a baby, it's troublesome. He can't even speak yet and, frankly, he's just getting in the way. These heartless words shocked me. It was shocking not only that my own son could say that, but also that Rachel nodded in agreement. So, taking care of your grandson and loving him is a grandmother's job, she said, as if summing up. Yes, please help us. We are going to have a drink near the station. Stephen, be kind and stay with Grandma, Dylan said, and despite all my attempts to stop them, they quickly left, ignoring everything I said. The station was a 15-minute drive from our house, and I couldn't help but think that this trip wasn't just a walk. I knew that they would use the money that could have gone to take care of the child for their own entertainment. Hey, Stephen. I cautiously called out to my grandson. He turned around and smiled, and that bright, charming smile reminded me of a young Dylan. Despite all the worries that gripped my heart, I couldn't help but smile back. Seeing his innocent face, I realized that from now on I would have to protect him. With each day they spent together, Stephen quickly learned the rules of the household. By the time he was 3 years old, he was already showing remarkable mental abilities. He spoke very well, even better than most children his age. But in this world full of uncertainty, I knew that taking care of him would fall on my shoulders. I couldn't help but adore Stephen, despite his difficult life. He was the only ray of light in this gloomy house, where his parents, my eldest son Dylan and his wife Rachel, constantly ignored him. They treated him as an obstacle, an extra burden, which only complicated their already carefree existence. Instead of working and contributing to the household budget, they went out drinking every day and sometimes did not return for several days. For Stephen, this strange situation had become the norm. He watched them cautiously, as if unwilling to approach what he had once called home. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to talk to Rachel. Could you spend a little more time with Stephen? You're his mother, aren't you? I asked, hoping that my words would awaken at least a drop of maternal feelings in her. Why are you saying this? I'm busy, you know you're the one taking care of him, right? She replied without even looking at me, immersed in her manicure business. How could she claim to be busy, spending her days doing only what she pleased? It suppressed my desire to yell at her, but thinking about Stephen made me beg again. At his age, just turned 3, children cling to their mothers when they feel lonely. Oh, please, I said, but Rachel just waved me off dismissively. I never wanted to be a mother at all. Maybe it's better if he calls you Mom? Are you serious? I asked, shocked by her word. Yeah, okay, of course, she said, not caring about my feelings. I must have seen the anger on my face, and I ended up not being able to have a proper conversation about Stephen when she just went out with Dylan for a drink, as usual. Stephen didn't seem to mind his parents leaving. He continued flipping through his picture book when he finally found his favorite fish and excitedly pointed it out to me, trying to tell me about it in his limited words. It was a relief to see him happy, but anxiety about the future of Dylan and Rachel wouldn't leave me alone. I knew they weren't going to take care of him, and my fears only grew when I thought about Stephen's future. With my husband's inheritance, I could cover his school expenses if necessary. I had no choice but to be prepared for anything. I often prayed at my husband's altar, whispering words full of hope and fear. I looked at his picture and felt him encouraging me, nodding in response, as if looking for support in these memories. For 2 years, I endured living with Dylan and Rachel. I've watched their reckless behavior. Every day they left, often taking money from my wallet without asking. While I was taking care of Stephen, he hardly talked to his parents. He was getting older every day, and shortly before he was supposed to go to elementary school, tragedy struck. "Hello, are you Stephen's grandmother?" an unfamiliar voice asked on the phone. Stephen was taken to the hospital. "Can you come to my meeting as an intermediary?" On the way back, after I received the adoption documents from the city administration, I got a call and was told that Stephen was in the hospital. I understood that the chance of adoption had finally opened up for us, and the hope was getting brighter by the minute. But at that moment, something terrible happened. Holding back my emotions, I rushed to the hospital where Stephen was taken. When I arrived, I immediately asked about his condition. The doctor, with a worried expression on his face, replied, "Stephen needs to be hospitalized." Confused, I asked what was wrong with him. "I'll explain everything as soon as his parents arrive," the doctor replied, waiting for Dylan and Rachel. At that moment, I was overcome by a feeling of panic. I didn't know how long I would have to wait, and what exactly happened to my grandson. The nurse came up to me with a worried expression on her face that made me uneasy. She nodded and quietly whispered something to the doctor. I felt a growing anxiety in me. Parents do not want to know about the condition of their own child. The doctor's loud voice echoing through the hospital shocked me with its indifference to Dylan and Rachel. I realized that everything was exactly as I expected. Swallowing my pride, I knew I had to take Stephen's place, stand up for him. I explained our family situation to the doctor. At first she looked doubtful, but after watching the notes I kept and realizing that Stephen's biological parents would not come, she believed me and explained the condition of her grandson. "Ma'am, the test results show cancer in his kidneys," she said, and at that moment it seemed to me that the ground was slipping away from under my feet. "What kind of cancer?" "It can't be." I blurted out, and I fell off my chair in shock. The pain of the fall was nothing compared to the shock I felt when I heard that my 5-year-old grandson had cancer. The nurse helped me up, and the doctor continued to say, "Fortunately, there are no signs that the cancer has spread. If he undergoes immediate surgery, his life can be saved." "Yes," I said, but immediately realized that we needed parental consent for the operation. Cancer can progress rapidly, so ideally we would like to operate as soon as possible. But how do I explain this to Dylan and Rachel? I couldn't imagine that they would show any concern for Stephen. While I was thinking about what to do, I decided to go into Stephen's room. When I entered, I saw something I couldn't imagine. Dylan, standing next to the bed, was saying, "Hey, I heard you have cancer. The doctor was talking to your grandmother in the other room. Know that your life is in danger, and if you keep trying to live, it will cost us more money. So do us a favor." His voice was full of contempt, and hearing those heartless words, my rage grew. But Stephen, looking at his parents, had something cold and mature in his eyes that seemed completely inappropriate for his age of 5. His parents, taken aback for a moment, soon started laughing again. "Really, you're such an expensive kid," Dylan chuckled. "Are you saying that you too are spending money?" Unable to hold back any longer, I ran into the room. Dylan looked surprised, but quickly turned his attention back to Stephen, continuing to mock him. "We don't need a dear child like you." I couldn't believe that my own son could say such words about his own child, who, despite his illness, was brave and resilient. Rachel laughed hysterically as she watched this outrageous behavior, and when I saw how she reacted, an indescribable rage flared up in me. I realized that from that moment on, we were strangers, and I would never let them mess with me again. "Goodbye," I said, barely able to contain my anger, and turned to Stephen. I hugged him tenderly, feeling him burst into tears, and I had a strong feeling that one day they would regret their choice. I told Stephen about his cancer and the upcoming surgery, assuring him that there was no need to worry about the cost. "I'm here, and I'll take care of you. Everything will be fine," I said, hoping that my confidence would give him strength. His little arms wrapped around me, and I felt myself filled with determination. I will do my best to protect him and provide him with what his parents could not give him: care and love. "Stephen, I want you to live," I said, looking into his eyes. "I know that the operation can be scary, but you will recover. I'll be here with you." "Grandma, if you're with me, I'm not afraid of anything," he replied, squeezing my hand. "I will go through surgery and treatment, I promise." I felt my heart fill with warmth when I saw Stephen trying to smile despite his parents' harsh words. I hugged him tightly, exposing my support and love that he needed so much. Later, when we were alone, I told him about the adoption process that I was preparing. He seemed a little worried at first, but eventually accepted the news with understanding. That evening was full of worries and hopes. I discussed the adoption with my eldest son and his wife, who, as always, were drinking at home. They never hid their indifference to Stephen and only said that they did not want a child because of the costs. Determination flared up inside me. I offered them a significant amount of money to keep them away from us forever. To my surprise, they didn't hesitate to sign the adoption papers, showing no signs of regret or affection for Stephen. Their faces were glowing with happiness when they received the money, and they quickly left my house without even looking at Stephen, who was looking at them in disbelief. I was saddened by their irresponsibility as parents, but I was relieved to realize that one of the sources of pain for Stephen had now disappeared. Soon after the operation, which was successful, Stephen recovered quickly. The doctor, beaming with joy, said, "Because he is so young, he will be ready for discharge faster than we expected." I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. "Thank you very much," I said, and he replied, "I'm glad. If you ever feel that something is wrong, come to me right away." During his stay at the hospital, Stephen became close to the doctor and hugged him gratefully when he returned home. With a light sigh, he settled down on the bed and said, "Thank you, Grandma, for letting me have the operation." "Oh, don't mention it," I replied. "Now I'm your parent, and that's what parents should do." "You must be tired today." "Okay, I'll take a nap," he said, and quickly fell into a deep sleep, snoring softly. Soon I got a call from the hospital. "Oh no, I forgot something at the hospital," a thought flashed through my head as I quickly answered the call. "Hello, sorry for the sudden call. Someone from the TV channel came to the hospital and they really want to meet Stephen." "Who's from the TV channel?" "Why Stephen?" I was completely puzzled. My mind was filled with questions, and after listening carefully, I learned that during Stephen's stay in the hospital, he became friends with a writer who was there for an interview. This writer shared some of Stephen's stories online and they were well received by the public. This news shocked me. I didn't know about this, since Stephen talked to the writer during my visiting hours. I was told that if it became a movie, Stephen wouldn't star in it and they wouldn't use his real name, but since it's his story, people who know him will be able to find out that it's about him. "I see, let me think about it. I'd like to discuss this with Stephen," I replied, deciding to hang up for now. Stephen woke up rubbing his sleepy eyes. When I told him about the call from the hospital, his eyes shone with joy. "Really? Will my story be a movie that everyone will watch?" he asked, barely restraining his delight. "Yes, I think they said they would hide your real name and make a movie," I explained. "Why is this normal?" "Let them use my name," Stephen declared with childish tenacity. His delight was infectious. I smiled at his sincere desire to share his story with the whole world. At that moment, I realized that despite all the difficulties we had gone through, Stephen remained full of hope and optimism, and I knew that together we could overcome any obstacles. "Stephen, I want you to live," I said, looking into his eyes. I know that surgery can be scary, but you will recover. I'll be here with you. Grandma, if you're with me, I'm not afraid of anything, he replied, squeezing my hand. I will go through surgery and treatment, I promise. I felt my heart fill with warmth when I saw Stephen trying to smile despite his parents' harsh words. I hugged him tightly, exposing my support and love that he needed so much. Later, when we were alone, I told him about the adoption process that I was preparing. He seemed a little worried at first, but eventually accepted the news with understanding. That evening was full of worries and hopes. I discussed the adoption with my eldest son and his wife, who, as always, were drinking at home. They never hid their indifference to Stephen and only said that they did not want a child because of the costs. Determination flared up inside me. I offered them a significant amount of money to keep them away from us forever. To my surprise, they didn't hesitate to sign the adoption papers, showing no signs of regret or affection for Stephen. Their faces were glowing with happiness when they received the money, and they quickly left my house without even looking at Stephen, who was looking at them in disbelief. I was saddened by their irresponsibility as parents, but I was relieved to realize that one of the sources of pain for Stephen had now disappeared. Soon after the operation, which was successful, Stephen recovered quickly. The doctor, beaming with joy, said, "Because he is so young, he will be ready for discharge faster than we expected." I thanked him from the bottom of my heart. "Thank you very much," I said, and he replied, "I'm glad. If you ever feel that something is wrong, come to me right away." During his stay at the hospital, Stephen became close to the doctor and hugged him gratefully when he returned home. With a light sigh, he settled down on the bed and said, "Thank you, Grandma, for letting me have the operation." "Oh, don't mention it," I replied. "Now I'm your parent, and that's what parents should do." "You must be tired today." "Okay, I'll take a nap," he said, and quickly fell into a deep sleep, snoring softly. Soon I got a call from the hospital. "Oh no, I forgot something at the hospital," a thought flashed through my head as I quickly answered the call. "Hello, sorry for the sudden call. Someone from the TV channel came to the hospital and they really want to meet Stephen." "Who's from the TV channel?" "Why Stephen?" I was completely puzzled. My mind was filled with questions, and after listening carefully, I learned that during Stephen's stay in the hospital, he became friends with a writer who was there for an interview. This writer shared some of Stephen's stories online and they were well received by the public. This news shocked me. I didn't know about this, since Stephen talked to the writer during my visiting hours. I was told that if it became a movie, Stephen wouldn't star in it and they wouldn't use his real name, but since it's his story, people who know him will be able to find out that it's about him. "I see, let me think about it. I'd like to discuss this with Stephen," I replied, deciding to hang up for now. Stephen woke up rubbing his sleepy eyes. When I told him about the call from the hospital, his eyes shone with joy. "Really? Will my story be a movie that everyone will watch?" he asked, barely restraining his delight. "Yes, I think they said they would hide your real name and make a movie," I explained. "Why is this normal?" "Let them use my name," Stephen declared with childish tenacity. His delight was infectious. I smiled at his sincere desire to share his story with the whole world. At that moment, I realized that despite all the difficulties we had gone through, Stephen remained full of hope and optimism, and I knew that together we could overcome any obstacles. I told Dylan and Rachel that they couldn't use his hard-earned money just for their own pleasure, and closed the matter once and for all. The front door burst open, and Dylan and Rachel's screams hit me like a wave. They started complaining and making such a loud noise that I had to call the police. Soon after the noise stopped and it seemed that they had given up and returned home, I realized that they did not intend to give up so easily. The next morning they made a scene in front of our house again. "Mom, please listen, I've changed. I'm turning over a new leaf. I'm sorry for everything, please let me in." Dylan begged, his voice filled with despair. "Stephen, I'm so sorry. From now on, I will be with you and take care of you properly, so please let me in," he added, continuing to knock on the front door, annoying the whole neighborhood. Despite their constant noise, Stephen calmly continued to have breakfast inside. Finally, he came to the entrance, but I didn't hear the door open. Curiously, I quietly checked what was going on. Instead of opening the door, Stephen watched them from a small window near the entrance, while they continued to knock, not noticing his gaze. Then he made a suggestion. "It's okay. I'm going to ask you a few questions. If you answer at least one correctly, we can really live together no matter what." He added, with a slight sneer, "You're still a kid at heart, aren't you?" "I'll answer everything," Dylan said with relief, although there was a note of amusement in his voice. After a short pause, Stephen asked the first question. "Tell me my favorite and least favorite dishes." Hey, Rachel, you should know this," stammered Dylan, clearly not knowing the answer. Rachel, trying to calm down, replied confidently, "Any mother would know that your favorite dishes are pudding and chien pie, and you hate sweet peppers." Stephen, looking at them from the window, said with slight surprise, "Are you sure this is your final answer?" "Of course, it's unthinkable for a mother not to know her son's likes and dislikes," Rachel replied with confidence, but when Stephen heard this, he laughed heartily. The couple, who did not expect to be laughed at, looked confused. After a good laugh, Stephen calmly replied, "Rachel, this is wrong. What a shame. Why did you always look so happy when there were cakes?" With deep resentment in his voice, he added, "I used to be allergic to eggs, so I didn't eat things like pudding or egg tarts. I love the egg tarts that Grandma makes, and I hate whipped cream. But I really love sweet peppers." Rachel asked in shock, "Is it true?" I could see the shock on her face when she realized she knew very little about Stephen. She and Dylan only gave him cheap instant porridge and slices of bread. I often wondered how he managed to stay healthy with such a poor diet. The reason Stephen wasn't sick was largely because of the nutrition he received in kindergarten. The director noticed that his diet was insufficient and provided food that did not cause allergies, carefully monitoring his health. She even warned Rachel about her poor upbringing and threatened to report her to the child care service. Rachel, realizing the gravity of the situation, decided to stop sending Stephen to kindergarten and moved in with me. Hey, how long do you think we've been apart?" "How do I know what you like right now?" said Rachel, upset. Then she asked the following question, "What is my birthday?" Stephen, with a touch of sarcasm, asked, "What's your birthday?" Rachel and Dylan looked confused, and I knew this was just the beginning of their exam. Stephen's birthday was actually today. Usually parents don't forget about such an important day, especially the mother, but despite this simple question, the couple showed no signs of knowing the answer. "Why don't you answer? It's such a simple question, isn't it?" Stephen asked with a note of resentment in his voice. "Oh, of course I know what it is." "That's right," Dylan said, and Rachel turned to him and added, "Yes, of course I know." Their panicked tone was obvious, and despite their best efforts, it was clear that they did not know the answer. Stephen sighed heavily and said, "If you don't know, just admit it." Even after 10 minutes of silence, they still couldn't answer. His sad expression said that it was painful for him to realize that his own parents did not remember his birthday. My heart was bursting with grief for him. Suddenly, with an attempt to keep her composure, Rachel said, "No, wait, it just slipped my mind. Of course, I know your birthday." Her words were full of strained confidence. "You just caught me off guard. It slipped my mind. Can you give me a hint?" Stephen laughed out loud, but there were tears in his eyes. I felt sorry for him. I quietly came closer and took his hand. He looked at me in surprise, but nodded, wiping away restrained tears and looking directly at his parents. "Hey, Real parents remember their child's birthday without needing any prompting. You two have never celebrated me, so I expected this. Stephen, what are you saying? Rachel exclaimed, her voice trembling with resentment. After all, I did everything I could to give birth to you, and this is how you repay me? You should be grateful, she retold in response, but Stephen looked at her coldly, and she fell silent, realizing that her words did not find a response. Well, that's the last question, Stephen said, his voice becoming more confident. I had cancer, and I was treated in the hospital. Which organ was affected was a question that any parent should have been able to answer easily, especially considering that Stephen's illness had been discussed on TV for several days. However, their answers were unexpected. Isn't that a heart? Asked Dylan, clearly having no idea. No, it's the stomach. Rachel added with a nervous laugh. I was so shocked that I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. Despite the fact that Stephen's story was a hot topic, my son and his wife demonstrated a complete lack of interest in his life and health. Listening to them, Stephen must have thought it was worse than he expected. But to my surprise, he started laughing. Thank you, now I understand that this is worse than I thought. Did we miss something? Rachel asked, puzzled, unable to understand Stephen's reaction. Stephen smiled, but his eyes weren't smiling. It's kidney cancer. You claim to be my family, but you don't know anything about me. The only one I consider my family is Grandma Camilla. Shouldn't you be grateful that I gave birth to you? Rachel persisted, still angry. That's the whole point for me. The only one I can call a parent is Grandma Camilla. Oh, it looks like my car is already here. Please don't worry about coming here again, Stephen said coldly, leaving them with these words before closing the window with a bang. Outside, my son and his wife were screaming in anger, but when the police arrived and alerted them, they immediately fell silent and everything went quiet. I was worried that Stephen might have been hurt by this confrontation, but he looked relieved and even smiled at me. What I told them just now is really how I feel. I've always wanted to call you Mom, but I was too shy to say it. These words touched me to the depths of my soul, and I, full of tenderness, replied to him, Stephen, you can call me Mom whenever you want. Of course, Stephen, thank you, I replied, deeply moved by his words. I was hunched over very much, my emotions overwhelmed me, and tears welled up in my eyes. Mom, you're squeezing too hard, he said with a smile, but immediately hugged me back as tightly as the two people they claimed I lost my son because of. Their nonsense about me allegedly cheating was just ridiculous. I knew that everything they had done to Stephen was documented and recorded, including testimony from his kindergarten and a parent's diary that I kept. The police reviewed all the evidence and rejected their claims. However, the police contacted us to check the facts. The officers seemed disappointed by the persistent statements of my eldest son and his wife. After the call from the police, Stephen went to the police station alone to see them. When he returned, he looked rested and confident. I said goodbye to them and told the police all about the terrible things they had done. They won't have a normal life for a while, I thought, until Stephen said he showed me the evidence he mentioned. They seemed to believe that they could live comfortably off the royalties if they could get Stephen on their side. They even planned to sell it to someone involved in shady black market transactions. When I saw their terrible plan, I was shocked and a chill ran down my spine. I never thought that my own son could be so cruel to his child. Stephen spoke to me quietly, seeing that I was stunned. I asked the manager to look into it, and we found out the shocking truth. I thought if you found out, you might be so shocked that you'd faint. That's why I kept it a secret. I'm sorry, he said, a little embarrassed. It's all right, Stephen. I do everything for you and always have your back, I replied, hugging him even tighter. It's even scarier not to know about such terrible things. I'm really sorry that I've been hiding this from you all this time. The only one who cares about me means so much to you, Mom. That's why I want to protect you from now on, Stephen said, and tears of joy welled up in my eyes. Even though he had faced many difficulties and seemed to have matured in these 9 years, that shy expression made him look like a child, and it warmed my heart. My heart warmed when I thought about my eldest son and his wife. They were later found guilty of many other crimes and eventually served almost 9 years in prison. They have never repented or apologized. The letters they sent, collected by Stephen's manager, still demanded compensation for the fact that he was born. Stephen continued to visit hospitals to support sick children. He is now in high school and has reached puberty, but his kind and honest character has remained the same. He's been living a good life lately, and he seems to have a girlfriend. I noticed him sneaking off on dates, and I couldn't help but think how cute he was. The cancer we were so worried about is showing no signs of returning, and his recovery is going well. Although it is impossible to say that he will never return, regular checkups are necessary. Now he lives the same way as any other child his age, and seems happy every day. I was still fussing about Stephen and I often saw him. Naturally, there are times when he gets annoyed, but taking care of him gives my life meaning. I hope Stephen can put up with me a little more. My biggest goal right now is to live long enough to see his wedding, become a parent, and if I'm greedy, I'd like to see the face of his child, my great-grandson, so that he's healthy. Until then, I started going to the gym, and people around me are often surprised and call me a cheerful and young grandmother. For Stephen's sake, I will strive to be a mother so that he can proudly brag about me for as long as possible. I will keep moving forward.